Start taping. All right, Professor, enough of looking at the past. It's time to look at the running back position for MVP. We did this for the quarterbacks last week, and boy, oh boy, I was so excited of what it showed with the quarterback data. I'm a little concerned if I will get as kind of a treatment
Yeah.
as you break down and analyze the running backs. But
Okay. So what we did last time, I recorded the I recorded the our discussion video wise, and I put it up on our site, and I'm doing that here. This is the table that you sent me. I colorized it. This is the year, the position, the MVP, the high, the low, a player scoring above 100, 75, 50, 25, and the number of players that had 10 full games. So this was your metrics from 18 to 23. The averages are shown below, and I colorized. And looks like, Dennis, the worst year for running backs was last year, 2023. Look at that, 76%. Again, this is not any individual, this is as a group, as a position. And looks like the golden era was 2021, and 2020 was right there in 2018. So we've kind of had 3 years that were really different than 19, 22, and 23. But even though the worst year, we had the highest 175. I thought that was quite interesting as well. And we still had 14 players above 100 on your MVP data. So I thought you could take us through this, see what you think, Dennis. Did I kind of hit those metrics right? This is the data you had gathered and sent to me.
absolutely. And for folks that are saying, what is MVP? What does
Yeah,
that
you can
mean?
go and yeah.
This is a number that combines the three most important things to chase on a weekly basis in fantasy football. And this is very obvious of what the three most important things are, because there's three things that your player can do every week that can affect the outcome of your matchup. He can have a fantastic game, like huge amount of points, and all alone, he can be the factor that causes your fantasy football team to win. On the flip side of that, he can have an absolutely awful game where he scores two or three or four, or maybe even takes a donut. Oh, due to turnovers or whatever, he could have a horrible, horrible score. And it doesn't matter what the rest of your team does. That horrible score at running back can take your team right down. The third thing that he could do, he can have a above historic median performance that is not really all that great on the high side. So in other words, he just has an average, slightly above average game historically. And what that does is if you have a full team, if every one of your starters hits just a little bit above median, right on that historic median, you're probably going to win your matchup, even though you didn't have a single player that had a big game. So I take those three outcomes, and obviously there's a fourth outcome where you could finish just a little bit above median, but not quite over that high number, or you can be below median, but not in a lousy case. So there's different places, but we count just the three important ones that we chase. I combine it and I put it into this MVP index. Over 100, as you see, on average over the last 6 years, and this is a median, not really an average. So on median over the last 6 years, 13 and a half players scored 100 for the season, 21 over 75. Do you see a relationship right there? We're talking RB1s and RB2s. Then your flex players over 50. There's a higher population of those, obviously. And then kind of the scrubs just barely hit over that 25 mark. Now, of course, that includes the whole population up to and including the over 100 guys, but 25 minimum is not asking much with this data. And there were still only 33 of those guys. Well, 10 games or more played. And I defined a full game for running backs as 40% of the snaps. Only 39 players did that in 10 or more games last year. So we're talking about a small population among the bigger population of running backs, but that's an overview of what I did here to develop this MVP index.
So as I looked at the data, if you look last year, 39, the year before, 34. So 39, it kind of, and yet we have one of the worst years for the MVP, 76. What are you thinking about that relationship? Kind of almost an inverse thing happening.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense, but because what we have is more of a timeshare at the position
So
than we've ever had before.
You think that's tipping the hand to this lack of bell cows?
That's correct. That's correct. That's exactly my analysis. Now, I am actually doing a study to look at usage to make sure that those numbers are where we expect them to be.
Gotcha.
But my gut feeling tells me in this running back by committee world that we live in, that there are fewer and fewer guys getting that high volume, and that's leading to the MVP number dropping. But look at the elite, the guys over 100.
It hadn't dropped.
It stayed pretty steady over the years. That's a good sign, because we know that if we've got a guy over 100, those are our stud running backs. That's our population of stud running backs. And Professor, that top end is not changing. There are still enough players getting volume to get that population up to 14. We're just not seeing a huge population, but we're not seeing a lot of change in that over the last 6 years. We've pretty much been in this running back by committee environment all the way back through the early 2010s. So it doesn't surprise me to see that, but that number of guys who have played more than 10 games increasing tells me that we're seeing a lot more of these timeshares on a permanent basis. Before, what we were probably seeing was we're probably seeing more like 16 to 18 bell cow backs that were really good, and then timeshares for the rest. And then when the guys got hurt, we were seeing a substitution that was a timeshare replacing the stud because the replacements weren't as good. So that's what I think this data is trying to tell us.
Seeing that number 14, that we're used to think about RB1s as 12.
Correct.
Yeah. So this tells me there were 14 RB1s in some ways.
Yes.
So that means theoretically somebody may have drafted 2 RB1s. I mean, by your MVP. So I'm assuming that in lineup decisions, I mean, you're not even worried about it. If they're above 100, they're in, right? Is that? And 75, most likely they're in, unless there's a strange matchup. 50 is where you're deciding between them and wide receivers. Is that kind of where you've come to with this data?
Yes, and I will even go one step farther that if
Mhm.
I've got an RB over 75,
Uh-huh.
if I've got three guys over
Mhm.
75
You're
on
going
my
there.
roster, I'm
Mhm.
figuring out a way to get them all in the lineup.
Okay. Okay.
And I
So
don't
you're
care what
trying to
the
shoehorn them into the flex then.
correct, and I don't care what the matchups are
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
if I got a guy who is scoring at that rate to get those MVP index datas, they're able to do it against good defenses as well as bad. And that's the key right there. Now, if I, and here's the thing, Professor, the
Yeah.
14 over 100 do not line up with the 14 top running backs at ADP. And that's the exciting part because each year we have two or three guys who outperform where they're being drafted. And they're not even like last year was a surprise with guys like Kyron Williams, right?
Yes.
Wasn't a surprise with a guy by the name of James Conner, yet
No.
he wasn't going in the top 12.
No, he wasn't.
So each year, we can probably identify two or three value running backs
Mhm.
that we're getting later, which gives us a chance to have two of that 14
Yeah. That's nice.
population over 100. And
Yeah.
I had some teams last year, Professor, we're looking back on them.
Mhm.
I had three of them.
Sweet.
Now, that's mainly dynasty leagues
Right. Where you
where
have
you,
time to trade and stockpile and these kind of things.
yeah. And I even had one
Draft
team
in.
with
Yeah.
four of them. So,
Nice.
yeah. So that's the kind of thing where in dynasty, you can really clean
Mhm.
up. But even in redraft and best ball, I won't find it very surprising at all to have three or maybe even four
Mhm.
of that small population on the same team if you drafted well.
Nice.
And that's the key is understanding because I can guarantee you if you apply the typical zero RB strategy, you're going to be lucky to get two of them,
Mhm.
if not lucky to get one of those 14.
Mhm.
That's why I don't think that strategy works according to looking at the data.
Mhm.
I think you got to grab your quality, you got to grab value. And if that means grabbing a wide receiver because the value, the sure bets at running back are gone,
Mhm.
then you do it. You grab wide receiver, grab a
Y-
tight end for that matter.
Yeah.
But the key is to grab value, not to worry about
Right.
position. And this population, though, not changing
Nope, it's
was
not.
probably the biggest surprise to me is that the elite at running back, the names are changing, but the population is the same.
Yeah. And I will clue people in that I've got lots of data. We'll have more takes on zero RB, late quarterback, early, better than zero drafting that Dennis gave away to the world. The editor's still mad at him. So anyway, we'll have lots of off-season frolic and fun. I've got tons of data that will be posted between now and draft season. Okay, next slide. This was then I came in and added the total average total RB points for the year and the max, the highest one that did, and then we compared that to the MVP. So notice right away, Dennis, that the best year for MVP was not the strongest year for total average PPR points at all. And the last 2 years have been really nice. If people were looking at that metric, they were thinking, wow, that's been an interesting year. Dennis's data would say be a little cautious. It's a different way to look at the landscape. And in horse racing, if you're looking at things different, you have a higher chance of maybe getting a a longer shot coming in and making and getting value. So I really like that the MVP is tracking things differently than just total points, because I believe everybody is on the total points. So I would argue for 2024, people look, kind of viscerally feeling, it was a pretty good year for running backs. But Dennis would argue, yeah, there were some key players, but overall, it wasn't as strong a year that you think, and you could have been surprised. So, Dennis, what you think about this data?
Yeah, so MVP removes injuries to a certain point.
Yes.
Okay. Because it treats a player with 10 games played the same as a player with 17 games played. And by that, I mean, I don't give a negative for not showing up to play on a particular day. So as long as you hit 10 games or more, you're going to make this chart. You're going to, and I use 10 games as the cutoff because, people keep saying availability is the best ability. And I said, not really. Because if you give me 10 great games, the other 6 games of the year, I will substitute somebody. And I'll figure out a way to come up with that. So the MVP removes injuries from the equation. And I have a feeling max points does not. And it is, the average of PPR points does not. Because if you've got a guy, it's just going to look at the data set a little bit different. It's going to identify on max points for the season. It's going to say that guy that only played 10 games wasn't as good as the guy who played 17. And my answer is maybe he was more valuable to your team, even though you had to find a replacement for 7 games.
So notice the lower 3 years, 23, 22, 19 had the highest average PPR points. So it's an inverse relate. So it's telling us something, Dennis. And since I can do this, let me see. Yeah. So for quarterback, we actually see an inverse relationship as well, because I scaled the numbers here on this. So
yep.
I didn't do it quite that way. But there's in quarterbacks, the MVP was showing an inverse relationship as well to that. And so I'm just saying I think there's more to it than what we're seeing right now, Dennis. I don't know what that is yet. It's because in a system, and as a biologist, when we look at the world, right, when we look at an ecosystem, and there's lots of inputs and lots of things. Sometimes we don't know what those things are. They call those higher level effects. In other words, you cannot see, you can see simple, you can't see complex. It's hard. That's why biologists have invented, and mathematicians, physicists, they've all invented and used math. Okay, I know, got to use math to try to get a handle on what we can't see, right? Obviously, physics is the ultimate to that. They're talking particles we can't even rarely visualize to try to describe the world. But that's what I think is going on. Is there's things that you're measuring with the MVP that is different, and we're not even knowing what we're missing. So I'm encouraged that there is that, and it's not because here's a way to flip it. If MVP was saying the same thing as average total PPR points, why would we worry about MVP? We would just use total points. So when the public is using total points in drafting, and we're using MVP or maybe some other metric like my com data, we're doing things different. and we, I think, have an advantage because it is a weekly game, and everybody's doing this and we're doing that, right? It's the zigzag thing. So I'm actually encouraged that it's inverse, Dennis. I'm just not sure I can tell you the extent of all the print. It's called principal components. I can't tell you all the components of what's going on to help explain this, but that tells me that we're probably getting an advantage because people are not even seeing what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think what we're picking up in, and there's two different categories here, okay? I'm not so concerned about what the average MVP is. I'm more concerned about the guys that are in my starting lineup.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say this, if we are right in diagnosing the right guys for our starting lineup, so we are getting two of that 14 crowd, the gap between us and the competition on a weekly basis
Mm-hmm.
is going to be even greater when this MVP number is even lower. So, in other words, if we are on that high population and they're not, our advantage is huge in a year like 2023. 2021 wasn't as big of an advantage because
Yes.
everybody had a guy that was at least closer. Um, but now I'm looking at the population numbers of players at these positions, and I'm intrigued to see how that population doesn't change.
It didn't,
But
but
I'm
yet
interested in,
it's inverse.
but
Yeah.
it's inverse. But I'm also interested in seeing in the years we had low MVP,
Yeah.
did we also have ADP not forecasting the right top guys? That's another
Yeah.
piece of research that I've got to work
I,
on
I
next.
I've kind of I'm going to have some handles on drafting efficiency, Dennis, that I've kind of hinted and you and I talked about, and I'm finishing up the tight ends, and we'll take a journey to that question coming up soon. I'm going to another slide here, but I just wanted to bring out for the few that are listening, you're probably getting an advantage. Uh, but we are marinating our data slowly. This is atypical of what goes on Twitter, to where they flip something out, they spew things out, and then they're gone. And then they'll come back, and if they're right, they'll tell you about it. If they're wrong, you never know. And that's why we love fantasy receipts, especially because fantasy receipts can really show the ridiculousness that is out there. So we are not, just like it's February, we're not ready to draft yet. We're just slowly adding a little extra cayenne to the gumbo here. We want it just right. We don't want it, daddy bear, mama. We want the baby bear. We want it just right. And that's where we're going. And Dennis and I are actually taking different approaches and different studies and coming together. So, folks, you're actually going to benefit from that. So, I just wanted to jump, that's, in probably in college. I don't know, Dennis, if you took any kind of drama, but the Greek plays where they would put the mask on and they'll, say all this crazy stuff. Then they'll take the mask off and say, well, let me tell you the reality of what's going on here. Sometimes I have to take the mask off, say, folks, let me tell you. And remember, Twitter, the masks are always on. You don't even know who these people are, right? They have these personas. I don't know what website, who knows who knows, could be somebody from wherever, we just don't know. But I'm telling you, I know Dennis has his meteorology degree. He's been doing predictions and data in hand, working, figured out using predictive models. I've been doing it. No surprise here. we are what we are, folks. So, you know, if you take the mask off, it's still our old smiling mugs. There we are. So anyway, this slide. So what I did, Dennis, is I just did a visual of what our charts showed there. Just the MVP and then the average, and you can see it's probably the scale I could change, and you see I mess with the scale a little bit because hey, it's visual. But the green bars are your MVP. You can see the 3 high years and the 3 low years. So I think that's interesting. So Dennis, if you looked at your diary, did you win when you had the 3 up years, or did you win more in the 3 down years? Part of your diary, folks, and I got lessons on that and articles and things. Is this helping us win? So that's another part of this. That's why you've got to figure out, does what Dennis and I are doing and saying, does that help you? If it doesn't, I wouldn't listen to us. I'd go, you know, drink some more beer and, you know, swill around. And that's fine. Let us know what leagues you're playing in so we can help you lose your money quicker. But anyway, so Dennis, I mean, I hadn't thought about that till now, but if I look, I wonder if and I don't know if I've got all my data uh, to look, but anyway, I made the most money last year that I made in a while. Last year was a good year for me. And then 2015, when I played zero RB, I played the right draft strategy in the year for injuries and things, and it worked out. So, in other words, I got lucky and everything worked like I thought it was going to work. But other years, it doesn't work that way. But last year with MVP and my calm data and whatnot, I did well. I was pleased with myself. I made money, got money in the bank, and it was a good year. But I just noticed for people, you know, was 23, 22, and 19, was those great years for you or not? So maybe that, you know, maybe there's some more data that we need to try to pull out, Dennis, on that. And then I'm going to jump to this. I took that data and I scaled it on, oh, this is me going backwards. This is me scaling it. So I took 2021, your MVP, and I made it 100%. So it's a little clearer. 2021, 2020 were nine. So they were basically the same year. In 2018, 98, 99, one. So basically the same thing. And notice 19, 22, 23, basically in the 80s. Big difference. And look at the scaled average ATP at the end of the season. And again, that inverse relationship really pops out if you do the scale. And if you plot the data, I think it's a little more apparent. Here is the green plot, Dennis. This is the trend line for the MVP. And we went from last year, and then there's 18. And of course, you know, 19 dropped down. So there was bad, 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 and good, good, good for that. But the trend line kind of drops a little bit. I mean, that's what trend lines do. They erase the unicorns. And here is the average ADPs. And you see we had a roller coaster last 2 years that we dropped, and then 19 we were top, and then we dropped again. So this is just reiterating what I've already showed. But the reason I do things in 3 or 4 different ways, I wasn't in the Navy. I always heard that in the Navy they assign 3 people to do one task, so they figure somebody does it right. So I do different ways to try to make to try to get my same conclusions, and that's what I'm seeing, this inverse relationship. And I know last year was really good for money in my pocket, and it was the lowest MVP. So maybe having Dennis's data probably meant, and I know I definitely, James Conner was definitely on my list to draft. I drafted a lot of him and whatnot. So I just want to let you know that. And then the payoff here, Dennis, I was just trying to speed us up a little bit. Here is the variation in your data. Look at the difference. Your MVP is tight. The
Whoa.
average ADP is not tight. It is lots more variation, and the max is very tight. So again, I think your MVP is tight, and it's allowing us to really laser focus on what we need to see. Whereas if people are following the average ADP, I mean the average PPR, look at the variation they're having to deal with. Not saying, look, if your diary says you're up here above that bar, that means you're in the, the top half of the show, then you probably don't need to even listen to us. But overall, on average, this tells me that people drafting based on the average PPR versus people drafting with your MVP, I think you've got an advantage. Just the tightness, Dennis. Just if you could stay above this line, I think the clarity that your MVP is bringing versus average total points, the average PPR, is spectacular. And I don't think you've seen this data, Dennis. So there you go. I took you through a lot, but it's getting supper time down here in Arkansas. So we got to heat up the victuals and eat here. But again, we saw this same thing with the quarterbacks. Let me go back. Same thing. Notice the quarterbacks were less tight, Dennis.
Yes.
How about that? So
yeah,
less
not a
tight.
prediction I would have made.
I wouldn't have made it either. I'm telling
No.
you, your MVP. I think that. So again, folks, when we see this, it just makes me want to do more questions than answers, Dennis. And I don't know the answers right now, but it definitely intrigues me. It definitely makes sure that I'm not going to look at average PPR points a player did last year with any confidence versus your weekly values, your MVP. I'm going to be trying to use that as more my guide this year than probably ever. I'm going to do my counts above median my way to look at weekly as well. So one day we'll try to see if we can marry these metrics together and see which one is which. But we're not there yet. So
And
go
I
ahead,
really,
Dennis.
yeah, I really believe that what we're seeing in your counts above median is being also picked up in MVP.
I think it will be.
And I actually think that my weekly values in this, I almost look at MVP as being a combination of counts above median and weekly values, and then sprinkling in that bonus of subtracting for the bad game percentage. And looking at the bad game percentages, that's pretty tight data too. But I'm intrigued that the average MVP
Again, over
is
this
is so
18 to 23. 18,
six
yep.
years worth
6
of
years.
data.
Look how tight.
It's tight, and it also tells me that the data is better, because if it's tight, we're in good shape. Now, I will say this, go back to that previous slide showing the trend lines. The trend lines for running backs is much looser than it was for quarterbacks. Quarterbacks, almost every point was
look
on
at
the
it.
line, was
Look at it.
real close, real
Everything
tight,
is following. Yep.
real tight.
Yep.
But if you look at running backs, you can see the variability is there.
Well, part of that is 2019 really shifts that trend off.
Correct. Correct. And that's the 1 year that if you were eliminate that 1 year, although
It
we
would be
did
tight.
repeat it, we sort of repeated it in 2022
2022.
and 2023. So we revisited that after the spike years. My impression of this graph is because we were below the trend line, and yes, we continue to go below, but last year we're right on the trend line. I think we're going to see that curve bottom out here in 2024 and going forward. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that as our low in that. I don't know if we're going to go lower than this low. I think we're going to probably maintain, but that's just a guess based on trend lines
Well,
and
based on
based
my
on where the
diary,
data.
if 2024 is like 2023, I may win a little money.
Yeah, and this is the thing is if we are better, and here's the thing, if you just take that population, go back to the population one. No,
The
one more down. The
this one
the
or
showing
the
showing the
very
spreads,
the
showing the
box and whisker.
spreads.
Yeah.
Box and whisker showing the spread.
Yep.
So if all I do is I guess right half of the time
Yeah. You're
with
pretty
average
tight.
PPR, I've got a better chance of hitting that population, every single one of that population above
Yep. The
the
median.
best, like
Yeah.
up above the total population of average, just based on the spread. I don't have to be lucky. I'm going to be good because I've got less of a population to pick from
Yep.
to get that half right type of mentality. So I'm very intrigued when we look back
And it's tighter
at
than the quarterbacks. And the
tighter
quarterbacks are
than
a
the
little different.
quarterbacks, which
Yeah,
shocks me.
there's some interesting things here for us to think about, Dennis.
Which really tells me that if I've got a guy who has been good 2 years in a row where he's clicking along at above 100 pace, that's a guy I'm betting on
Yeah.
for the next
Probably
year.
money in the bank. Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
going to be money in the bank because even if he drops, like
To
if the guy hit
75.
if the guy hit 105, 105 and now has a 10% decline, he's
You're the
still
90s.
golden. He's still golden to me as far as a starter goes. So if we get some versus average PPR points, if you look at
Bam.
guys who spiked on the PPR points,
And then the next, yeah,
the
it could be
next year they're
bad.
way down.
Yeah.
And because again, total points tells us who stayed healthy.
Yeah.
MVP removes part of the injury equation. No, we don't grade guys like Nick Chubb, who only played one game, or DK Dobbins, JK Dobbins, who only played a few games. We remove them from the equation and only look at guys that played 10 or more games. But, Professor, if I've got a running back who's played 10 or more games 3 years straight and has been over 100 and is not over 30, the data tells you he's going to be a guy that you could rely on, because even if he drops 20% in value, he's still over that 75 group.
Yes.
That's what I want, is I want to eliminate as much of the guesswork as I can. And guess who?
You want the highest floor.
Yes. And guess who was a big darling of ADP last year, who is not a darling of MVP index? Tony Pollard.
Yes.
So we can, if we can identify the false hope running backs.
Yes.
Alexander Madison was another one that
Cam
MVP
Akers.
did not like. Cam Akers, MVP hated him. So we look at those guys and we say, wow, they were underachievers according to MVP versus where they're being drafted. Those are the guys we avoid. And we bulk up on the guys who are consistent over 100 performers. If he's done it the last 2 years, I'm rolling the dice on this guy. Knowing this is tighter than the PPR points is exciting news.
I like it, Dennis. I'm proud. This just, but I will say that we're not locked in necessarily. This is tells us where to start. But if there's
Correct.
something going on, like in preseason, they got a gimpy leg or whatever, coaches are whatever. They've got some legal issue. I'm not just going, well, I don't care about that. I'm the MVP. No, it's a place to start. And I'm saying this data says where we're starting is going to be above where others are going to start as a group. So that means in the league, you're probably really only competing for 2 or 3 out of 12 that are probably, and these are people probably, for whatever reason, they're good too, and whatever methods they're using. So that's fine. If I can play in enough leagues and beat some of those players enough time to put money in my pocket, I'm happy. And that's what I did in 2023. So yes,
here's
we're not stuck on this, folks.
no,
But
no.
I'm telling you, we're starting halfway up the mountain than your other league mates.
And here's where strategy
Oh
and
yeah,
having a good rating
value and
system
yeah.
come into play. So here's the thing. I'm a big believer now that looking at this data, the MVP index is going to help us minimize mistakes at the top of the draft.
Probably.
And it's also going to identify.
Might catch a good one or not. Yeah,
It's
later.
going to identify 3 or 4 overdrafted guys
Mm-hmm.
where we're going to come in and grab his backup.
Yep.
That's going to be the Kyren Williams effect. Is we're going to it's now got a name because it was so successful last year.
Yeah,
but we were right about Madison.
Yeah, I didn't draft.
We were right on Chandler,
all.
but the change came way too late to be beneficial.
Nope.
We were correct, but the coach kept running them out there way too long.
Yep.
So those things are going to happen, but you're taking those backups at an incredible value, and you're taking more of them than your league mates. So your league mates might come out of the draft with 5 running backs. You're coming out with 8. You're insulated against mistakes at the top end of the draft, and you've got data on your side to guess which of the vulnerable guys who you already didn't draft. So you already have the bonus of not missing by drafting a bum, but now you're going to line up and you're going to take their backup and have that guy in reserve when the bum becomes apparent to the coach and gets replaced.
The bum.
Very exciting data, Professor.
What was that good stuff or not? Well, I'm recording this video and gonna put it up on our site eventually here. And the few that are listening, I think we're going to give you a little bit of an advantage, probably later in the season. Dennis, I don't know when you're going to get out all your draft numbers for your MVP. I don't, have you put it out yet? I don't think you put it out yet.
No, my goal is to get this data out here of what happened. Take a look at position by position,
after
weekly
the draft
value, MVP. That should all be done by the draft.
Yeah,
and
so
then
probably for sure June, huh?
Well, it'll be done before the NFL draft so it'll be all set in May, and then come by the end of May, I'll have that first forecast of where I expect MVP indexes, if I expect them to change or not.
Yeah.
I'm going to be very stingy looking at this data, Professor, and how tight this data is. I'm going to be real stingy on how much of an increase I forecast.
We do need to get to the player level to
Yes,
see what happens. So we're not,
correct.
yeah, but it looks sticky to me. We'll see.
And I think it will be sticky because not only the averages are sticky, but that population not changing much.
I do
The
like that. That usually means at the player level, it's what we think.
So
Yeah.
I'm anticipating out of a typical 12 to 14 players in that MVP, I expect we have 8 returners every year.
Mhm.
And then the others are guys that we have to pick up on. But guess what?
Mhm.
We're going to pick up on some of those because they're going to be the backups. It's going to be the Kyron Williams effect. It's going to be the backups
Yep. It's
to
the guy.
bums.
Oh, yeah. The
The backups to bums theory is
Yeah.
going to be the next step
Yeah.
in the evolution
Yeah.
of this drafting strategy. And I'm excited that this data is getting me more juiced up, Professor, because I think we're on the right way. I
Yeah.
think we're looking at the data, we're looking at the problem right
Mhm.
when the solution is more narrow
Yeah.
than the other population.
Yeah. And like I said, next time, next show is wide receivers, and then we'll do tight ends. So at the end of that, I don't know if we want to like a final show to where maybe we just look at all, the position across and kind of reformulate everything. Because when I teach, it's always best to review so people, make sure they got the lessons. Sometimes, you forget, oh, okay, yeah. So I might even winnow down these maybe to the scale level or something, and then we'll look at all of them to finish up this stuff on your MVP. Your MVP is looking like it's suspicious that it's going to be really helpful. And I guess we're exposing it to the world now. I don't know. And I don't know. Uh, so we folks, y'all should interact with Dennis on Twitter if he helped you last year. Send him some chief gloves or slippers or something. Put something in his pocket for you, and he can and make him happy. And we'll keep him around the Science of Fantasy another year or two here, and we'll see how it all goes. But anyway, Dennis, that by the way, that is my dog Thor, and he's got a milk bone. And here's D for Dennis there. So we'll do wide receivers next week, and we'll see how that compares, Dennis. We'll see
Well,
what those trend lines show us. It'd be tricky and interesting.
very interesting. I'm looking forward to it, Professor. So head over to the Science of Fantasy Football.com. You can read more about my MVP index.
Yes.
You can check out all the lesson plans from the Professor John Bush. And of course, wide receivers up
Coming
next
up,
week for the big data treatment. So we'll see how MVP fares at the wide receiver position. So come on back next week for another edition of the Science of Fantasy Football.
let's get to work, folks.